your dice, let's roll tonight. All the fun in the spotlight. Insight sharp and laughter bright. We're tuning in for delight.
Welcome everyone to Roll for Insight. This is a series where we sit down with experienced dungeon masters to get a behind the scene look at their process, some of their tips, memorable moments based on the questions. And whether you're like a veteran DM, a junior DM, or even just a player, maybe if you're just starting out or just kind of curious about the art of storytelling in D&D, we hope you'll find this plenty of value insights today. So it's Roll for Insight being rolled, like these questions are literally rolled. Like Peregrine hasn't seen the questions yet. I have, but these are going to be diving into topics. So they're going to be a little bit of mix of prepared and spontaneous questions. We're going to be talking about like world building, running encounters, handling players. So it's a variety of topics. And as always, there's going to be time at the end for audience questions, or if you have questions for our guests, it's going to be if it's a question, like a follow up question to something I ask, put in the chat. I'm going to be monitoring it, and I'll just ask it as it comes up. And as always, at the end, if you have like unrelated questions, feel free to put them in the chat. So let's dive in and roll for insight. So, all right. So, Peregrine, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your history with D&D?
I certainly can. So my name is Kendall. I'm Peregrine here, and been Peregrine for ages. Uh, I I'm definitely quite a bit older than a lot of the people that are on the server, but it's fine. I've been playing D&D since probably like the very early '80s when I was a kid, um, and had played it for a long while after that, and then fell away from it, and you know I got back in it with a pandemic with a vengeance, and I'm super glad to be back in the hobby.
Nice. So when you first started, what was that? Maybe like two, not
It was, I think, the original like basic set before even first edition, really.
okay.
So yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I came back. I dived back into 5e. It was right around the pandemic too. So, but how long have you been a DM? Like, what kind of drew you to the DM seat?
Well, I think originally it was simply the fact that I was the only one that had the game, and so if any, and no one, in the small town in South Carolina that I grew up in, knew about it. So I kind of had to be the DM and like, roused up a bunch of players, which I did. And frankly, I just felt I have always just really enjoyed the role. I really like to, um, you know, like tell the story, but like make the players part of the story. And I like to make worlds. And it just, frankly, I guess it just turned out to be a really good fit by necessity.
Okay. And what's your preferred style as a DM? Are you more story focused? Are you rules oriented? Somewhere in between?
Well, I think any of the players in my games would definitely say that I am kind of a stickler for the rules, but yet I think there's definitely a lot of room for like stuff to a lot of leeway for stuff to happen outside the rule. So if people want to try, crazy things, I'll say you can try the crazy thing, make the die roll, and if you roll well, the crazy thing happens. And if you don't roll well, then the crazy thing, well, something else happens. But of course, I also, I really like to get involved in, storytelling, and I guess probably for me, world building is like my first thing that I love about, I just really have fun making settings and places and for the party to explore.
Oh, that's great. And what kind of games, either one shots or campaigns, do you like running the most? Like high fantasy, gritty, homebrews? What kind of stuff do you like running?
So I only homebrew stuff because I guess like I said before about the world building, but I try to make them different. But I stay, I think, in a somewhat safe vein of heroic fantasy. I haven't delved a lot outside of that, even though the worlds, the games are all different. But it's more of an emphasis, things that you're emphasizing over, making the setting totally alien to whatever you did before.
So that's introductory for background motivations. I see I see typing, so I think a question might be coming. But these next few questions, we have about 5 questions. This is going to be general DMing. So it's going to be a little bit more about breaking ice and more getting into your approach for DMing. So, what's your approach to balancing combat and exploration in roleplay?
Well, it it may depend, but in general, I like to have a good mix of it. I definitely will have sessions that have no combat, and then I might have another session which has a lot of combat. But in general, I think I like to keep the combat to about, you know, a third of the session or less, and let a lot of room happen for exploring, role playing. Whether among the party themselves or talking to NPCs. I feel like you kind of have to have a lot of like space for that to happen because a lot of times the players if depending on how shy they or how outgoing they are, they may you've got to give them a lot of opportunity to really find their voice.
No, that's true too. Yeah. Um, s- Number two is going to be what's the most unexpected thing a player has done in your campaign?
Well, yes, definitely some very unexpected things. Um, we had a player who I won't say any specifics, but they were playing, quite a chaotic character in a party that was a little bit chaotic. But they had been fine. It had been a great fit. And then in one session, they simply decided to do a bunch of different things, like set a village on fire, and then for as no apparent reason, kidnap the mayor and try to drown him. And it ended up getting the party like thrown out of the village and almost arrested. So, it was totally out of left field, and that's basically in that situation for that to happen.
Nice. Player actions have player consequences, though.
Yes, try to.
Yeah. Questions 3, 4, and 5 are going to be follow up to a question I'm going to have in the next section. So I'm going to come back to those. Number 6 was how did you, and this is still audience questions. How did you develop confidence in either starting games or just like running games for players?
I think it's one of those things where when you say it, if people are new to DMing, that it seems like a cop out, but really it's just you have to do it a lot. You won't have confidence when you first start, and you just have to go with it, and usually it'll work out great. And even if it doesn't work out great, the great thing about this is there's always next session. Um, so I think I'm the kind of person that I really like to deal with people and talk to people anyway. So I don't have problems with trying to set up, or an issue I face a lot with is trying to when a player is trying to develop, say, a backstory for their character. They may have idea X and idea Y, and I'll try to like work with them to maybe add Z and whatever other letter they feel like. So sometimes it's about, yeah, I guess it's just about doing it a lot, and it's also just who you're working with. I mean, some parties really make it easy, and maybe some don't.
Yeah, and in a sense, like taking wish lists and try to apply what they're asking for the game too. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, question 3, 4, and 5 in the audience is going to be related to a question I'm about to ask. The next question was, have you tried OSE? And to my knowledge, I think this is Old School Essentials, which is like a role playing game. Have you tried that, like OSE?
I I have not specifically tried OSE, but I am aware of OSE, and I played not as a DM, but I played in an old school type adventure a couple of times. Um, It sounds to be honest, I think it'd be something I would like since I already have the experience with the older versions, back in the day. But I really like 5e. I just feel like it's super like approachable, and it's easy to bring new players in, whereas I'd worry with anything that's trying to replicate old school D&D, it was, well, not those things in large part.
Nice. Okay. And we got one more audience question until I get back into the pre-roll questions. What do you do, or what would you do if someone does like a very legal thing? So I guess like mechanics they're using mechanics, but they're using it to exploit something.
Yeah. To me, I think old school DMs in general, like, and this goes back a bit to the previous question about confidence. I think we just kind of came up differently in the game. I I'll I mean, okay, if it's something where they're blatantly trying to like abuse something, then I'll definitely put a stop to it. Otherwise, maybe I'll let it go. But in general, I take a pretty hard stance on what I generally call spell cheat, which is trying to like find a way to like exploit the letter of the law with spell descriptions. And maybe that's wrong of me, but I tend to just be like, I'll give you one warning, and then if you do it again, then maybe that spell doesn't work or whatever. Um, so but I really haven't had to deal with that problem too much. Mostly, I guess, because my parties tend to be, you know, not that kind of player. I guess.
No, that
Uh,
makes sense. When you said spell cheat, I thought you said spell cheese. I was about
yeah.
to say because that's what I call like when somebody's trying to like, hey, this is what the rule says.
Right.
I use
Exactly.
like, oh, you're trying to
You're trying
cheese.
to
All right.
cheese it. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I'm gonna pause on the audience questions, and some of the questions are gonna be a follow up to to these next few, at least the first one. So this is gonna be the pre-rolled questions from me. So, what is your approach to like creating maps? And some follow up stuff would be like how much level of detail it like your approach to creating maps and level of detail uh, that you use in making maps.
Right. Well, that's right in my wheelhouse. Since I am a heavy map maker. I'm not saying I'm like an expert, but I know what I'm doing by this point. I pretty much make about 99% of the battle maps that I use in my campaigns, and I also do make some of the world maps, although I'm still kind of getting the hang of that. But generally, I like to make it as detailed as possible, but given time constraints. Obviously, any DM, knows that there's always time constraints. Oh no, the session's coming up in a day or an hour. What do I do? So sometimes, the actual like time issues will make it less detailed, but I I like to have it look good. I like to have a map, like feel lived in. Like if you go in an ancient crypt, one of my pet peeves is I hate where it doesn't look dusty. Like it looks like why does the ground, like the stones, why do they look clean? It should be all grimy and whatnot. So I get really into I get a little bit anal with the maps in terms of levels of detail at times, but I I enjoy doing it, and I feel like it really helps me, bring across the world to the players, and the players enjoy it as well. So,
No, that's a great point. Finishing up for this group of questions, do you have any favorite resources for like map inspirations or or what tips do you have for someone that might be new to map making?
well, there's a lot of resources, online. I think a lot of it is you really kind of just have to get started, and I'm sure your first maps will not be good. Mine were terrible. For some reason, I have not deleted them off my hard drive and burned the flash drive that they're on, but maybe I'll do that in the future. Uh, to be honest, I really literally just one of my players showed me this thing called Dungeon Draft and that they had bought, and I was mesmerized. So I bought it almost immediately and just started going for it. But there's also a lot of free resources like online, like Incarnate, that you can use to make your own maps. But really, I would say what I like to do is, especially for a world map or a bigger map, I really don't do a world map. Um, I like to do like a region map. So instead of just having a world map, which is mostly blank, but maybe it has a few country names or like cities on it, which I want to make something that's like a little lower level, but it's a lot deeper in terms of things, cool things. I want players to look at this map and just be like, oh man, let's go there. That place looks great. Um, so in terms of people getting new to maps, give it a try. We've got a great maps channel and a lot of people that, here on Altrole that are really good with maps, so they'll definitely help you with questions or just how to get started.
Yeah, I'm putting it in the chat for map use, and this is players or DMs too. And a follow up to: have you ever had to adjust a map based on like a map that you've already created or established? Have you ever adjusted a map to maybe, how to word this, like change due to like a player character's background?
It depends. I guess I haven't had to like do a lot of maps, but what I will do is I'll add a lot of stuff. So I guess the answer is yes. Um, because I'm always, hey, I'm making a map, but a lot of the stuff it's just names on a page, or there's a lot of blank space. So if a player has an idea, or something in their backstory, I'm more than happy to add the like cool, castle of like a knightly order where they grew up, or you know, the mysterious like, monastery perched on top of a desert cliff. So I feel like, we can always add more, and the more it ties in with like, what they like to do, the better.
Nice, awesome. Well, how do you and changing gears to the next question, this is question two. How would you decide, or when do you decide when to end a campaign? Is it something that you maybe like develop yourself as a DM, or do you kind of like look at how the party is feeling about it and get their input? Like, how would you decide to when to end a campaign?
That is something that's been on my mind lately because I feel like one of my campaigns is sort of like spinning toward the end, and I've had in 5e I've had two campaigns that ended, and in the first one it sort of ended more because of like, people had moved on from the game and they got tired of playing online D&D. Um so it sort of ended because of like that reason. And then in the other one, I was able to kind of like develop it into a finale where they fought this dragon that they had dealt with previously in the campaign, and it worked well. But I've had a campaign that's going for, well, I guess it's really going on almost 3 years at this point, and we're getting to the end of it, but it's hard. Like, how much do I want to make sure everyone's like story has played out versus the big stuff, like, the big guys that they always hate, big threats. It's a lot to think about, to be honest.
Yeah, with the 3 year campaign, like how often were y'all playing?
We play every 2 weeks, so it's more like a week and a half, a year and a half, I guess, if you consider it an every week thing. But
All right.
it's still, a lot.
Question three: how do you deal, if you deal with it, players that don't get along? And I think this might be for like if it's maybe new player groups, or even
Sure.
if it's just like friends that have just something happens in the game, like players that don't get along.
Right. That's a hard one. I In terms of bringing new people in, I really like to vet them as thoroughly as I can. I mean, I'm not like giving them like, a job application or something, but I am talking to them for a half hour more. I'm asking them questions, and I'm trying to feel out previous experience, just cuz most of the time I find that the players are pretty solid, but there's some that are just, you know, they don't work well with others. And of course, like anything with humans, we have like clashes, personality conflict, or whatever. um in fact, I feel like I had a bit of a personality conflict with some of the players in a game I was playing, a campaign that finished recently. But you know the main time I had this happen was in one of my campaigns where I didn't realize that the players were really developing a problem because they were not open with me. And I'm not saying, that you have to be telling the DM everything that's going on. I mean, that's not your job to do, but it finally blew up to the point where they just both quit. And I was taken totally by surprise because I was like, what's going on here? And I'm sending them all these messages trying to figure out what happened. By the time I got the whole story, well, I just, I wish I wish I had like maybe asked a few more questions and gotten to handle that better because, and if it's a matter of where they're openly disliking each other, obviously that can happen. But, I think it's a matter of talking to them each separately and saying, like, can you get over this? Like, can you play as your character and not as the player? I mean, because that's what we're here to do, but not everyone can get over it. And, I can see a point where you might have to, like, think about removing someone from the game, which would be obviously the last resort.
Yeah, that makes sense because I mean it, especially like when you're like I don't want to say like a bunch of randos, but if you're like joining new play groups, especially with people you don't know, because like screening players, I try to do most of my screening at in the looking for game like in the postings. I
Yeah.
just like I'm transparent in letting them know like this is what's gonna be in my game, and then I'll put them all in a group and try to like, hey, hey, party meet, like I asked you all to have fun, like talk amongst yourselves, and you're not. but but yeah. Um, let's see. When question from the audience follow up to this: when do you draw the line with people's characters? And I guess this is in terms of screening, probably like if somebody's trying to use homebrew or if somebody brings you maybe like a 10-page background. But where do you like? How would you draw the line with player characters?
Well, I think it's a pretty open question, and could probably refer to a lot, like a lot of stuff. Um, in terms of characters, I really like to tell them, like, here's what the game world is like. Here's, roughly how it all works. And then if they suggest a certain thing and I really don't think that it's going to fit in the game world, I mean, I don't want to say, no, you can't do that. That's, obviously the worst thing. The GM's last resort, I guess. Um, but sometimes their ideas may not work so well with the setting that you have. And sometimes you can get around it. Sometimes you can say, hey, they're a one off person who's different than everyone else because, hey, they're a player character. So they're all heroes, right? But yeah, stuff like being too powerful. Um, I feel like as long as they're playing, trying to role play, playing within the rules, they aren't. I mean, hey, everyone can be optimized, everyone can be min maxed. I personally don't care that much about that. Um, And most of the time, I find that it doesn't matter. The only time I've had trouble with it is and I kind of learned my lesson on this, is in campaigns where you let people roll their own dice for like what their stats are and things. Then I ran into a problem in one situation where someone rolled super well. I mean, and they were rolling publicly. We all saw it. And somebody else rolled terrible. And it gradually grew into the seed of like envy and jealousy, which really, started wrecking the relationship between the player. And, you know, I don't like that, so that's why I started, just enforcing a point buy system. Everyone ends up with the same points and you can do whatever you want.
Yeah,
So,
and that's what I do too. I use I traditionally try to use a 27 point buy. A few months ago, I heard of somebody making a system for a 31 point buy, where it's like the min max. It kind of promotes min maxing, but
I actually use a 30-point buy.
yeah, I haven't used the 31 or 31 point system yet. But how do you like the 30 point system?
I still enforce the same rules, like, you still can't have a stat over 15. I just feel like it helps people round up their characters a little and not have like everyone have an 8 intelligence or an 8 strength. It just gives them a few more points to play with to, like, build their character to like what they think they should be.
Nice, awesome. Um, for the next question, if you ever have, do you manage like do you have world events or just like game events happen off screen? Maybe something of like you have a session and then at the next session you say like, hey, like something happened off screen in game. How do you like would you do that? And if you do, how would you manage it?
Um, I do that for like the big stuff. So frankly, I'm not like a lot of DMs in how I structure my campaigns. And whenever I say this, people think I'm crazy, but I really don't. I try not to use a BBEG. I consider it like maybe a bit of a cliche or a bit of a crutch. So I tend to try to do, instead to try to do threat, like big things that could be a threat to the world, and maybe the party will step in and stop them, and maybe they won't. And if they won't, for example, maybe they're just not interested. Maybe they don't care like what the giants are doing, like up in the high mountains, that they keep hearing about. That's their choice. But stuff could happen off screen. Maybe the giants are getting more powerful. Maybe the giant leader like raided a village or something. And then maybe they hear about that later as a rumor, or maybe they don't. So, I feel like that's, part of kind of the natural evolution of things. Same, you can do the same with factions, for example. Like you don't like anything to do with the Silver Cauldron, the adventuring group, but meanwhile they're doing other stuff while the party is, doing their thing.
No, that makes sense. And what about, like, have you ever had players that are like close friends or etc. that might expect or like ask for special treatment? Have you ever had that happen?
Um, Not fortunately not. And to be honest, a lot of my games I have my best friend in them, and in fact my brother was in one of my campaigns. Um, I guess I've been fortunate with that, but I know that's something that happens. Um, and the other thing too is like I kind of feel like, well, I don't know. I don't know how the best way to say this is. Like it can be really hard if you're starting out as a DM and your players are your friends, because they all might have some kind of expectation. Whereas I'm mostly playing with people that are strangers to me, but people who are experienced, players. So maybe it just doesn't come up as often. But I definitely have people that ask for things more. They don't expect it, but they do ask. And I feel like that's just a person to person thing. Some people, they really like to ask the DM, "Hey, what about this magic item?" Other people would never think to do that.
Yeah, or even like like advertising a game like, "Hey, no magic items." Like, but
Yeah,
hey,
exactly.
what about this magic item? But no. Question: have you ever had have you or your players had a character that became the villain in a current or future game?
In Not in the way that like they're the world spanning villain, that the party has to bring down, but yes, in the way that they're like a more small time villain. We had a player, a character, um, who he was his character was fine. It fit into the party well, but he was also shady, and he was all into these like kind of underworld business. So eventually the player quit the campaign, but before that would happened, he was already kind of heading to be like working for this crime boss. So essentially, after he quit, I just ended up making him like a minor villain that the parties had to deal with. Not like in terms of fighting, but like he's that shady guy that can has the connections and everything. But it's frankly, I do think that's extremely cool. Extremely cool if you could actually work it out.
So the last question for this section is going to be like handling player levels for so party levels. But do you handle characters for their player levels? Do you level them all up equally? Do you say, hey, like just maybe based on experience points, like, hey, you're at level 3 now, you're level 4? How do you handle character
Um,
levels?
I pretty much just, the whole party levels up at the same time. The only exception to that is I've sort of developed this system where, because in the game, especially in online D&D, people are gonna have to leave the campaign for whatever real life stuff. They don't like it, whatever. So the only exception is if a new player joins an existing game and say the party is level 6, I'll have the new player join at level 5, and then maybe they'll level up to 6 after a couple sessions. It's just a little bit of a way to like show that they're like this new person that the party's taking on. But otherwise, yeah, I just level them up at the same time. I'm sure I don't level them up as fast as they would like to have done, but I think it's a old school D&D thing again that, the D&D, the like experience charts used to be totally insane where like, the amount of XP you needed per level was like increasing by these huge numbers. So I feel like, maybe I could level people up a bit faster, but I really just believe that everyone should level at the same time. And I don't bother with experience points at all.
Yeah, and DN like the 5e 2024 rules added a new. I don't think it's a new system because it's stuff that I've seen before. I've seen it like over 10 years ago. Um, like session based advancement. So it's like uh every three like every set kind of established by Like it would be by
I
the
would say
DM.
that's probably closer to what I do. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll
okay.
just say I usually just I'm writing down in my notes when they leveled up, and then I'm like, okay, it's been enough time. They level up again.
And one last follow up question to this, and maybe even related to leveling, but do you allow do you allow transferred items from, like, if you end a campaign and it's the same players, maybe they're even using the same player character, do you let them roll their items and their equipment into the next story? Or maybe even if it's like somebody from, like, you're doing a one shot and they're like, well, I had this from the last one shot. Like, how do you handle that?
Yeah, that I think for one shots it can work pretty well, especially for a good example is if you're running games on like a West Marches server where you're playing with different people and you may have the same adventure there several times, then it makes sense that like they would carry their items over. But in terms of between campaigns, I would say no, just because that situation would not come up for me. I mean, I'm not going to be running the next campaign in the same world, and they won't be the same characters. Um, but in certain situations, like in one shots, I could definitely see that working. Or, for example, maybe if you had a guest appearance of a character from a different campaign in a future appearance, campaign, I could see that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Awesome. So we're shifting sections. So these next two are going to be kind of like thought provoking. How do you know when to, quote unquote, break the rules for the sake of a story or a situation?
Yeah, you know, that's I guess in a way I maybe I break the rules a lot. Um, you know, most DMs would tell you that, ultimately the rules are, at the DM's discretion. And of course, you can actually go really wrong with that by being very inconsistent or, mean in your interpretation. But I feel like I generally stick to the rules, except when it would make the story better. Um, so, like, for example, I don't consider I really don't consider that any NPC follows the same rules as the party. Like the NPCs might have different spells, they might not work the same, they may have classes that don't work the same, and occasionally that party or a player might they don't like that, but basically the only people that are I'm holding to the the rules are actually like the party and of course the monsters, to some extent. But I never have a problem with like changing stuff up or saying, something's different about how the rules work as long as it's consistent because there's nothing worse than being inconsistent in your rulings, and I know that can really piss off players.
Yes. And do you think that DLMs should tailor the campaign to fit the players, or that the players should fit themselves to the world that you create?
That's a tough one actually because I feel like ideally it should be both. But what tends to happen as a DM is that you've probably, in many cases, already created the campaign, maybe even before you get the players. So how could you have like planned it for the players initially? But I do think as much as possible, you should feel free to. It's a common problem if you're making your own settings that you're so in love with what you made that you're afraid to change things. Whereas I feel like you really should just feel free to change whatever because nothing's set in stone until you actually start playing, even maybe not even then. So I definitely think the characters should fit into the world. But yes, I definitely change things for their backstories, maybe their ideas, maybe they have ideas about parts of the game worlds you never even thought of. Just take those ideas and put them right in there. I say.
Yes. Yep. These next two questions are of a different section, but if you could redesign the rules for initiative, what would you change, or what have you changed about it?
Um, well, I pretty much play with standard initiative. The only thing I do use is, I use roll 20. Um and it has a uh like add dex to the initiative roll as a tiebreaker. So if you roll a 16 and you have a 13 dex, it'll be 16.13. Um I feel like that's a good system just because ties are weird, and especially ties between players are weird. Like how do I don't even know what the official rule is about how you're supposed to sort it out. Um,
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be like the players decide amongst themselves, and then if monster and player ties, then the DM decides. So,
right. I pretty much just tend to let if the player ties to the monster, then the player goes first. Is usually how I do it. But I do change. I do a few things sort of just on a case by case basis sometimes. Like I feel like what happens sometimes is maybe the party's going into combat, you're rolling initiative, but the first person that happened to roll the highest, like maybe they weren't even involved in what triggered it going to initiative. I think we all know this situation where one person or two people trigger the combat, and then the other guy in the back happens to roll highest initiative, and he's like, "Hey, what's going on?" So I think in that situation, I do like to let people do something like a pause and maybe even turn their initiative down to a lower level because I don't like to have them waste a turn just because they don't technically know what's going on.
if you could create an entirely new plane in D&D, like a new plane of existence, what would that be like?
Uh, yeah, that's interesting because there are so many planes, aren't there? I'm definitely not a planer expert. You know, I'm not somebody who even uses the planes much in my games, but
Yeah, like the two donuts and then everything in between.
yeah, exactly. I do think I do think it would be. I really like the demi-plane, like the demi-plane of dreads. I feel like I've made up a couple of those. I haven't used them in a campaign yet, but I have some really neat ideas for them. So, and one is, and I haven't used this, so it's not really saying anything, but I had this idea where there's an inn. It's just a regular inn somewhere, but unknown to everyone. It's also a demi-plane of dread, and the guy that like controls it, he controls memory. So like the party would constantly be meeting people who didn't remember that they had met them, or even the party might forget stuff that had happened. And it would just be this really like weird, confusing situation of where they're just constantly unsure of what's going on.
That's pretty interesting. All right, we have a audience question. What if your whole party dies in the very beginning of a long campaign? Would you revive them or just restart the campaign?
That's actually a good question. I feel like in that situation, if it was like, in the first few sessions, that it might be nice to provide some kind of way for them to um, be brought back to life. And in fact, maybe you could actually just change the campaign to, maybe you could actually change, like, include that as part of the campaign. Like maybe they're fighting whatever and they die and they think they're dead, and then suddenly they wake up because this, powerful cleric like got their bodies and brought them back to life. But there's a catch. Now they owe him, and now he's got all these demands that he's telling the party of what to do.
Yeah, like doing like a Rip Van Winkle, and they all like fall asleep at the beginning, but they don't know they're asleep.
Exactly. Because honestly, there's what's the help of making them like re-roll characters or whatever that they just spent all that time making.
Yep. 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 So these next ones are going to be player interaction types. How would you handle a player who comes out and tells you like, "Hey, this is a chaotic neutral character"? How would you handle that in gameplay?
Well, it definitely does happen. I feel I'm not a huge fan of the alignment system in general, but I feel like all the alignments are fine as long as you're not just calling your character chaotic neutral as an excuse because you want to play him in a very chaotic manner. I mean, I think most characters that are chaotic neutral are not like complete psychopaths that are just doing random crazy things. They are just people that um, don't really care about the law, don't really care about good and evil, maybe just don't really care about anything. So, I feel like I could work with it as long as it didn't come to the point that, it was actually negatively affecting the campaign for the other players that were, trying to play their own alignment.
This next question is going to be: have you ever had a player who like hogs the spotlight, or maybe, and specifically a specific type of spotlight for like social encounters? Have you ever had a player like that?
Yeah, I that's definitely been an issue at times.
And
Um,
the question here would be like, how would you like how did you handle that type of situation?
um, I think it depends a lot. Each party has a different like setup in terms of how. In other words, some parties, for example, they have a lot of people that just don't like to talk. Maybe they're shy, maybe they're on the spectrum, maybe whatever. And, so it kind of like leaves a blank space. And I think sometimes people try to fill the blank space, but like too much, you know, and in some ways the game kind of like leans into this because the game's the one saying, hey, you, Mr. High Charisma, you've got persuasion, you've got all these other skills, so you might as well use them. But the point is, like, no one should be dominating the game to the point that no one else has a chance to play. And you really should try to as a DM, I would hope, have as many chances that intimidate or some other skill should work is equally as persuasion. So to be honest, it really is mostly a if it's becoming a problem, I'll talk to them. I'll just try to say maybe this is going to be an issue, maybe dial down this a little. But I also am in that situation. I'm always going to be trying to say, hey, you other silent player, what are you doing in this situation?
Yeah, that's what I usually do. I try to I don't tell the players that I do it, but I actually like roll a social initiative for them, and then I'll just like go around the table and
I love
uh
that idea.
yeah. Um and what is your strategy for keeping track of everybody's backstories?
Yeah. I guess I would say it's evolved. Um, I've had one of my campaigns that has since finished was a new player campaign. So every person that joined, and then if they left, we invited all people who were basically new to D&D. And I didn't really enforce having like a ton of backstories because that wasn't what it was about. It was they could just kind of play and go with it. But but since then they've really gotten into making some like really detailed backstories. Uh, Sorry, I feel like I lost the plot of what my my answer was gonna be on that one.
No, you're good. It was that essentially because it's especially like in the digital age with like D&D Beyond. I think it's pretty nifty that they have the like the notes section
Mhm.
that like if I'm the DM, I can just instead of hey, let me see your character sheet, I'll just like look at it. If it's blank, I'm like, hey, you
Yeah.
circle in red, like hey, give me
Yeah,
something, give
I
me two
tend to
sentences.
talk with them a good bit, in Discord DMs or whatever, beforehand just about what their ideas are. I think I mentioned this before, and just try to evolve it a little bit because frankly, some people may have a ton of ideas and some might not, and it's good to help the people that don't. Not tell obviously, you don't tell them what it should be, but you should they say this, you give them another suggestion that could work with that or whatever. Um, you know, and if they really wanna have a 10-page backstory, fine, but, I don't guarantee that I'm gonna read all 10 pages.
Yeah, and I have one more follow up before we get into closing because we've got about 15 minutes left. How do you feel about players showing each other, like showing the other player, or like not showing, but like a player wanting to look at another player's character sheet and like background story and that? How do you feel about that?
So, if personally, I don't normally allow it. I mean, in Roll20, you can, the GM has control over, like, who can see what sheets, and the only time I allow it is on a rare case where, say, someone is, like, playing someone else's character or something, but that I don't really allow that very often. So, it's really a GM like a GM by GM decision on that, I think, because I personally would think, why does anyone really care about someone else? And I mean, what are they going to do? Like read secrets and then use them? I mean, that's metagaming at its worst anyway, which we should be
Yeah, that's
discouraging,
true.
right?
That's true. Yeah.
So, and I mean, maybe it's a situation too where like some people like to keep, believe it or not, some players like to keep stuff about their character secret. I've had people that didn't tell anyone else what their subclass is, and they just had to figure it out like through context. And sometimes people have like stuff in their backstory that is big secrets, and you certainly don't want other people to stumble onto that.
And I have we have one last audience question, then I'm going to get into the closers. But do you allow player like for the people who don't talk too much in campaigns? Um, how do you handle if they're like their character not talking or like not speaking?
Yeah. So obviously, as I mentioned a minute ago, trying to ask them specifically what their character is doing is a lot. I think a lot of times when it happens, it's some people are just shy or they're reluctant to jump into the conversation over the people that are like more at ease with it and tend to talk a lot. Um, so for one thing, ask them. Uh, the other thing is I like to do, and I mean, I do the in Roll20, they have this. I'm sure they have this in other VTTs, um, which is they have an emote function. So to me, that's been one of the best things in my games. We use all the players use that heavily. So basically, when so and so in your party is talking, you can be over here just typing in slash emote, like whittles. My character whittles on a piece of wood or something. So in other words, it lets them role play without talking, which some people I think really appreciate. And of course, even people that do talk, you know, you know how Discord is. If like two or three people are trying to talk at the same time, it doesn't work. So it lets people role play like in text instead of like talking. So and if it comes down to it, you could actually talk to them out of game to see if there's anything you could do that would get them involved more.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So we're through the questions. These next ones are going to be some closers, and then we'll get into
Sure.
if the audience has any questions after that. What advice, if it's just like one piece of advice that you would give to new DMs, maybe like like the junior game master role holders here on Altrole, or maybe somebody that's like, hey, I haven't attended any of the learn to DM classes. What's one piece of advice that you would give to them?
I've definitely worked with quite a few people in those situations because on other Discord servers where they don't have all the classes and everything, it's a little bit more like find someone you can talk to like mentor you. But honestly, it sounds like stupid advice, but the biggest advice I say is just go for it. Like, you know, you in your first session or two sessions or whatever, things will go wrong. You will make mistakes. You will forget rules, but it won't matter because everyone is having fun. And whatever you do wrong, you can just get better at the more you do. So, really just go for it. And like, don't really let anything hold you back because like stuff, a lot of people think they need to like be rules experts. You don't. Or even, they like to think they have like to have a whole world set up or anything. You don't. So, really just do it.
Yeah. And what's one thing you think every DM should try at least once in a one shot or campaign?
Yeah, at least once in a one shot. That is hard. That is hard. But in a campaign, I would definitely, maybe this is a little outside the scope of the question, but I would definitely say everyone should definitely have fun homebrewing a setting for either one shots or campaign. It can be a lot of work, but man, it is fun because everything is up to you. Like all the stuff that's in the books is pretty much Forgotten Realm centric, but you don't have to make it like that. And you don't have to create a whole world to run a game or two. Maybe you just want to create, say, like a town or, a river settlement or something, and that's where your one shot is. So, I highly recommend that people give that a shot. You don't have to make it, like, okay, I'm creating my 700-page book of the world and all its lore.
Yeah, when I started making one shots, I usually get about 25, like 20, 25 pages of stuff on a Google Doc, and just adding images to that adds like 10 pages. But yeah, great advice. How do you keep yourself inspired and like motivated to keep creating or even running games as a DM?
It's sometimes I ask my question and I don't know. Sometimes that's what I ask myself because, there's definitely times when I'm less motivated, but in general, I just really enjoy it. And I feel like in this day and age, we've got a lot of tools, be it AI or be it other types of tools online, so that if you aren't so motivated, you can like get help. I've been using this AI called Claude. I know some of the DMs on this server use it, and it is super good because it is like you can really give it detailed things that you're thinking about, and it will come back with a whole bunch of really interesting ideas that you may never have thought of. Just little stuff that boost, your inspiration and your like creativity because we all get stuck. But in general, I feel like I guess I just have a lot of ideas in my head.
Nice. So just a little push to kind of get that idea out.
Exactly. What I used to do, and I probably made 3 or 4 adventures like this, and it sounds silly compared to AI, is I used to go to this word generator, and I would generate, like, 7 words. I'd keep doing it till I got rid of all modern words, and I would just make an adventure that included those, like, 5 or 7 words.
Nice. Do you have any exciting campaigns or like ideas that you're working on that you want to share?
Um, I have a lot of ideas for stuff, and, I tend to, like, write them down, and then maybe it gets evolved into something more, or maybe it doesn't. Idea that I'm kind of percolating about now is this. Well, it'll be based on the Punic Wars between Rome and Carthage, but it'll be kind of like a maritime campaign. Except, of course, it won't be Rome or Carthage. It'll be a fantasy Rome and Carthage with magic and stuff. Um, so that's kind of what I've been working on at the moment.
Nice. And is there anything that we didn't cover that I didn't ask you about that you want to like take a minute or two to talk about?
Uh, I would say, I think I was just gonna maybe mention house rules. I know that's a topic of much discussion because, every DM has, like, their own possibly weird house rules. Um, but I would say feel free to make your own if you're starting out, because maybe there's stuff you just don't like. To me, I don't have that many house rules, but the ones I have usually evolve from me just getting really annoyed by stuff. Like, I have a house rule where because I got really annoyed by how random the skill system is, that basically if you have proficiency, I give you expertise and to all the players, and then I increase the DCs of all the checks by proficiency bonus. So functionally, it just makes it harder to succeed if you're not proficient. Just because I felt like it was, really weird that like, some, you know, expert at Arcana or whatever was, being outdueled by the barbarian who kept rolling 19 or whatever. So
Yeah,
that's, just a side note.
yeah, that's legit. So, where can people find you at here on Altrole, or if you have any channels you want me to tag, where can they find you at? Like what channel?
They can definitely find me usually in general chat, GM chat. People can send me a direct message. I don't care. I'll be glad to talk to you about any DMing stuff. Um, I, I'm all about trying to teach new players the game. I don't really have I have a Patreon for my maps, but frankly, I don't really keep up with it, so I don't think I'm gonna like put that out there. Actually, it's in my Discord profile anyway. But uh, yeah, so we got a great server here and a lot of great people.
No, I appreciate it, and you're part of what makes it great. So, I really appreciate you taking time out. You were nominated. It was I don't see who nominated you, but as they come in, we we try to reach out. I reached out to you a few days ago, so I really do appreciate you taking time out.
Definitely, I really enjoyed this and really appreciate being nominated because I've seen listened to some of these before with a lot of great DMs that we have around here.
Yeah, looks like excellent interview. But with that, if there are no questions, I'm going to close out and catch y'all next time. And if you have any nominations, if you go under the upcoming events, if you want to nominate someone, we're trying to ask for if they're not on server to invite them in so we can at least contact and figure out who they are. Like try to reach out to them. But if you know a game master here on Altrole that you want to nominate for these interviews, we do try to get to them as they come in. We had some over the holiday come in, and it was just because it was a holiday. Everybody was kind of scattered around vacation in their own personal time, but we are trying to get it some more on record. Awesome. Well, Peregrine, everybody else, I appreciate your time today, and we'll close out. Catch us in the next one.
Crack your dice, let's roll tonight. All the fun in the spotlight. Inside sharp and laughter bright. We're tuning in for delight.